And this is where I find common ground even with folks who don't believe in climate change, like George Will, pretty conservative columnist for the Washington Post. He came to one of my classes a few years ago. He doesn't believe that humans are partly responsible for increasing global temperatures, but I asked him if he would support replacing part of the payroll tax, part of the employment tax in this country, with a carbon tax. And he said that he was all for it because he hates the payroll tax. And with unemployment at the time was 7 or 8%, I hate the payroll tax. Right? And Al Gore hates the payroll tax. Al Gore says we should tax what we burn and not what we earn. So I asked George Will what he thought about the fact that he and Al Gore agreed on this particular issue. And George Will said, well, he said, an idea should not be held responsible for the people who believe in it. You might be an economist if you adamantly refuse to sell your children because you think they'll be worth more later. You might be an economist if you don't read human interest stories because they don't interest you. It's tempting to think that if only I did one more study, then I could convince people that climate change is really related to human activity, or one more cost-benefit analysis will convince people that carbon taxes are a good idea. But I think it's a little more challenging than that once you actually step out of the ivory tower and start talking to your neighbors. And so the communications element, and how do you actually reach out to people, and how do you connect with people, how do you connect with audiences, not just academics, but quote-unquote normal people, turns out to be really important, and comedy is a great way to connect with people. Well, I should confess, I should show you my T-shirt. This is my my Enjoy Capitalism T-shirt. So I don't have a problem with capitalism. In fact, you know, when I describe what I work on when I work on carbon taxes, I work on using the tools of economics and the power of capitalism to protect the environment. So I think that there is some concern about like greenwashing with green capitalism, and it's important to ask what it means in the same way that's important to ask what clean coal means. Right? So you have these terms and they get used and misused, but at heart, I mean, part of it, I think, is that it's hard for me to think about what an alternative to capitalism would look like. It's not like the Soviet Union, for example, was a green, pioneer. The Soviet Union did terrible things to the environment. Economics is really about choices, and about the choices that individuals make, the choices that businesses make, and the choices that collectively we make as a society. Economists recognize, like everybody else, that there are important values that are not just captured in market transactions. Economists for a long time have known that there are market failures related to environmental issues. You get overpollution, you get overfishing, for example, with the tragedy of the commons. And I'm not sure what the alternative is, but I do think that there are very powerful market forces at play. And what I work on is using those market forces to protect the environment. How do we tweak public policy, for example, to make sure that businesses have an incentive to develop low carbon alternatives to fossil fuels? And I happen to think that capitalism is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. And so what I work on is how do we harness that and sort of take it in a direction that we want to go? And it was actually pretty amazing. They interviewed 3 economists on this show. They interviewed Robert Shiller, who won the Nobel Prize. They interviewed Joseph Stiglitz, who won the Nobel Prize, and they interviewed me. I felt like kind of a self-aware version of Sarah Palin. The best climate policy in the world, and it's one that very few people know about, is the revenue-neutral carbon tax in British Columbia, actually passed by a right-of-center government that said, look, we want to do something about climate change, we want to be market-friendly, we don't want to grow government. So they implemented a carbon tax, and it's $30 per ton of CO2, so that's about 30 cents a gallon of gasoline, 3 cents a kilowatt hour of coal-fired power, and all the money from that carbon tax is used to reduce income taxes in the province of British Columbia. Terrific policy. It's been in place since 2008. It has successfully reduced carbon emissions. The economy of British Columbia is doing great. So really, it's a shining success and kind of a textbook example of how to use economic instruments to protect the environment. In Washington State, what we're talking about doing is having the same kind of carbon tax, so fossil fuels will become more expensive, but cut the state sales tax by a full percentage point, and then fund some special programs to benefit low-income households and energy-intensive manufacturers. But overall, for most households, they'll pay a few $100s a year more for fossil fuels. They'll pay a few $100s a year less for everything else. And overall, what that's going to do is shift people's individual decisions at the individual level, at the business level, in sustainable directions that we're confident are going to reduce carbon emissions and really, I think, move the world in a more sustainable direction. People here who are looking for a way to escape the summer heat in Arizona, next summer of 2015, you should come to Washington State. You should help us collect signatures, get this on the ballot. We're gonna change the world.